honored to have Ed Schein. Ed Schein has, as many of you know, has done an enormous amount of work in the OD space and many other spaces for many years. Ed Schein has also been working with us, Henry Mintzberg, in Coaching Ourselves to publish some Coaching Ourselves modules. During this webinar, Ed will be talking about his thinking around helping, humble consulting, humble inquiry, and the newest Coaching Ourselves module, which we will be publishing shortly, which Ed has done with his son, on leading with humility. So, without further ado, Ed, thank you very much for being here today. Please tell us your, how did you get to this this thinking about humble consulting, humble inquiry, helping, all of this?
Well, let's say it only took about 50 years. The story really goes back to a book that many of you may be familiar with called Process Consultation, which I wrote in 1967 as a young consultant working with Digital Equipment Corporation that had me sitting in their basic, they had just been founded a few years before, and I was working with their top group. And they wanted me to help them with communication and stuff, and I kept trying to show them how to do things better, and they continually rejected all my suggestions. So I gradually learned that the first problem is to find out what the client really wants to do, rather than telling the client what to do. And I realized that the key to that was to build a relationship. And I use those words. It's very important for the consultant to build a relationship way back then in '67. But the problem is I never said what that meant. What does it mean to build a relationship? So many years later, when I was out here in Palo Alto thinking about things, I realized that this model of process consulting really applied very well to the helping process in general. And so I thought about coaching and teamwork when people try to help each other, and realized again that it's really all about building a relationship. And that became even more clear to me when I realized that the problem with particularly Western society, and I see this particularly in the U.S., we love to tell things. Telling is good. Telling means you know stuff. And in one of these, in the helping book, I had a chapter called Humble Inquiry, and the publisher actually said, you know, that's a pretty good title. You ought to write a book by that title. And I said, thanks very much. I had just finished the helping book. I said I'd think about it, but keep bugging me, which the publisher did every 6 months. Finally, in, I guess, 2013, an incident happened that got me mad enough to write the book. I was out looking at a batch of very interesting mushrooms right after the El Nino rain out here in California, in this retirement home. And a nice little old lady came up with her nice little white dog, pointed a big finger at me and said, you know, Ed, she didn't call me Ed, she said, you know, those mushrooms are poisonous. Well, it happens that my German mother had taught me all about mushrooms, and I knew that not only were these not poisonous, but they were also not edible, but they were very interesting. So I looked back up at her and I said, well, yes, I do know that. But that didn't stop her. She pointed the finger all over again and said, and you know, they can kill you. Well, that turned out to be totally inaccurate, and I really resented that she thought she was entitled not only to tell me stuff, but to tell me wrong stuff. That got me started writing the Humble Inquiry book, and I realized again that what was wrong was that this woman and I had no relationship. We were a couple of strangers, and she felt completely comfortable telling me what to do. So the Humble Inquiry book, which says, ask instead of tell, really got me thinking more about it's time to really tackle the question of what is a relationship. So the Humble Consulting book really starts with that question. Is a relationship something that is describable? And I decided that since all societies have, classes of relationships, there are, the underclasses and the overclasses, the rich and the poor, that I really ought to talk about how this communication process works in these different relationships, and realize that what I ended up calling a level 1 relationship is our normal stranger transactions. And that actually includes all our professional transactions with doctors, with lawyers, and so on. And I had learned that in particularly in hierarchical situations, when we maintain professional distance, which is what society says you should maintain appropriate distance, that also undermines communication. How often when the doctor marches in with his clipboard and his army of interns and says, well, Mr. Schein, what's going on today? I'm not about to tell him how I really feel. It's awkward. And so I'm going to, produce something that's very surfacey. So what I'm leading up to is the idea that we have to learn how to personalize relationships to get past this professional distance stuff. So Humble Consulting is basically an argument that if you're a coach or a consultant, you have to get personal with the people you're working with. And then as I thought about working with Coaching Ourselves, I realized that really is the key to the Coaching Ourselves concept, because when you are in a team together, working on something together, you are invited and hopefully take advantage of the fact that you're together for some time, which permits you to personalize the relationship, that as you work together on these modules, you don't stay in a stranger professional distance mode. You get to know each other, and the more you get to know each other, the more you tell each other the truth, and the more you tell each other the truth, the more you begin to trust each other, and lo and behold, the team begins to work together. So I hadn't really thought about it this way, but if I were adding a paragraph to the Humble Consulting book, I would throw in there that, by the way, if you work in a Coaching Ourselves mode, which I happen to favor very much, that you're also going to have the benefit of personalizing your relationships, which will make the team work better above and beyond the learning. So that's sort of the 10-15 minute history of 50 years, Philip. Does that trigger any questions?
Triggers a whole bunch of questions. I'm just going to ask folks if you have any specific questions. Again, please feel free to type up the questions, ask the questions in the question option, or even the chat window if you can't find the question option. In the meantime, I have a couple of questions myself, Ed. One of the thoughts I was having as I was listening to you talk, and we discussed this before, is how does one go about building these type of relationships in organizations? Many of the folks that are with us today work in organizations or work with organizations, and many of them are OD professionals, and their challenge is to a large degree to perhaps help build these kind of relationships in organizations.
I think the The dilemma is that we do have a managerial culture out there which favors professional distance. It's really not appropriate to get too personal with your subordinates, because that might lead to favoritism or all kinds of other presumed negative sorts of things. However, it's also true that the more distant the relationship, the less likely it is that when the subordinate sees something that's really going awry, when quality isn't what it should be, when there's a safety issue, there is no particular incentive for the subordinate to go to the boss and say, boss, I think you ought to know that there's something going on that isn't right. The professional distance, even though the boss will say, well, it's the subordinate's professional responsibility to tell me, the reality sociologically is, and you see this over and over again when you do focus groups and ask people, when you see something going wrong, do you tell your boss about it right away? Most people smile, shake their head, and say, basically, of course not. Why not? Well, because basically he's busy, he's not interested, he's not going to do anything about it anyway, so I'm not going to bother him, or he'll shoot the messenger, or whatever. All of that by way of seeing this process has to start with the boss. There is no way that you can say to subordinates, you know, you people really should be more open, you should really be more trusting, you should really tell upward what's really going on. I think the boss has to make a conscious effort to create a climate, reward people for bringing bad news or being more open, and most important, be more open him or herself. The way you personalize is, if you're the boss, to say, let me tell you what's on my mind today. You know, I've been having this and this kind of thoughts, and just get a little more personal. Take your subordinates out to lunch now and then, which equates sort of the power thing. Now, if you've got a boss who doesn't get it, the only clue I have gotten from people who have had this same question is they take a copy of Humble Inquiry and leave it on the boss's desk and say, hey, I ran into this interesting book, you might want to take a look at it.
Marvelous. You know, Ed, while you were talking, Delia Hayden, one of our listeners, asked the following question, and I think to a large degree you've answered it, but she asked, there is a fine line between personal and professional, as was just said. How do you strike balance and maintain healthy boundaries? What determines the sweet spot, and how do you find it?
I think that's the sort of classical how-to question that you assume I would have an answer to. And the answer is, we're all pretty well socialized human beings, and we pretty well have a sense of what's too personal, what's too intimate, when we cross these boundaries. So my notion is that if we just put the boundary around the task we're trying to perform, if the team gets together and say, well, what do we need to know about each other to do a better job? That doesn't mean we're going to go out and play games together or sleep together or do all sorts of other things that might be more personal, because we kind of have a sense that that's not appropriate. Outward Bound learned this. You know, they used to take people out and then get them talking about their private lives and so on, with groups that even had to work together, and it didn't work. People hated it. It was too personal. So I'm only suggesting personalizing in the context of the job, which means being a little more open about how you feel about the job, maybe sharing ideas about how the job could be done better, and equating status periodically with informal events. My son-in-law, a surgeon who has to build relations with his surgical team where he's the big shot, and they all have to, you know, trust him and he has to trust them. He will tell you that he does two things. He takes them out to lunch so that they get at least some sense of who each is. But then when they do the checklist, instead of racing through it and sort of trivializing it, he says to the chief nurse, I want us to go through the checklist slowly with a lot of eye contact. I want anyone who has any questions about it to feel free to raise them, slows things down, opens the door. And he says, even with strangers, it's amazing how much that enables everyone to get more personal. Or my other medical example is, what if the next time the doctor comes into the room, you've got your Johnnies on, you're all ready for the consultation, you know that it's going to be rushed because medicine has become that. What if the doctor marched in, put his hand on your arm and said, Mr. Schein, you know, we've only got 10 minutes here, but let's make the most of it. Even that kind of a comment, I think, would personalize the situation without it going out of bounds. So when I talk about personalizations, I'm not talking about letting your hair down and spilling everything. I'm talking about just getting a little more personal around the work situation. And I'm sure you have all experienced this in your Coaching Ourselves groups.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. And Delia makes the comment, fantastic. That's extremely helpful insight. So thank you from Delia. There's another question here coming in from Rod Willis, who is Coaching Ourselves partner in the United Kingdom. One comment I want to make for everybody. What is Coaching Ourselves? It may not be clear to everybody. Coaching Ourselves is just 4 to 6 managers or people in an organization getting together for these 90-minute, what we call peer group coaching, which is essentially helping one another become better at their practice of management, grounded on a theme which comes from these workbooks, and Ed Schein has published a number of these workbooks. So this process of getting together and helping, dialoguing, reflecting, and supporting one another does build these level 2 relationships, as Ed would mention. So the question, after my long introduction from Rod, is in the UK, he's saying, he's in the UK, so he says, Coaching Ourselves looks to support the relationship development space as well. In the UK, we see this issue in management space as well. However, we also see this in those just starting their career. Have you seen this, and do you have any thoughts why this might be? So folks just starting their career.
Well, I think when you're starting your career, you're sort of being tested all the time, and you probably believe that as a young, particularly if you're starting your career as a manager, I remember asking my classes of managers at MIT, when you first got your promotion from being an employee to being a manager, what did that mean to you? To my dismay, almost unilaterally, everyone said, well, what it means to me is that now I can tell others what to do. Oh, that's what management means, I think. And it's fed by what I would call the management culture. The manager is the one who's supposed to know the answers and to tell people what to do. So if I were coaching a young manager, I have a grandson who's just taken a job, I think he understands that humility and letting some of the more experienced people teach him stuff is essential for his growth. So I think that it's particularly important to get the coaches, managers, to create this climate of showing the person that when you're first promoted, your job is not to show off and tell, but to learn the craft of management and work your way into that. Uh, I think it's the trainers of managers who need this insight, because when you're given a job, it's only natural to grab it and become a little king in your own empire. So I think it's up to the trainers, I think it's up to the organization development people to make managers who train other managers more aware of how dangerous it is to start with the mentality of now I can tell others what to do.
Excellent. Ed, as you were talking, I was thinking, I'd like to ask you, and I suspect others would be interested, where's your thinking going from here? As you go forward, you know, you've been working in the sort of the realm and this sort of trend of the humble inquiry, humble consulting for the past couple of years. Perhaps you could share with everybody how you see your thinking and progressing over the next couple of years, next couple of books, perhaps.
Well, I think the next book with my son, Humble Leadership, Humble Management, is sort of an attempt to top it off, in the sense that it's all well and good to say consultants should learn to be more relational. They will say, of course, what's new? I think to say that CEOs should be more relational is a bit of a stretch, as you all know. They're interested in looking good to the board. They're interested in going out to the banks and raising money. The last thing in the world they're going to be interested in is being humble with their subordinates. So I think to make the argument that humble leadership is the way of the future hinges on showing leaders that as technology becomes more complex and as work becomes more intercultural, the reality is the CEO won't know enough to really make sensible decisions. The CEO will become more and more dependent on his immediate subordinates and the technical subordinates under him. And the argument that I will want to make, and that my son Peter has experienced in his 25 years in Silicon Valley, is that the leader of the future will, of necessity, have to learn how to be what we're calling here and now humble from time to time. Will have to say to his subordinates, you know, not only am I dependent on, in the sense of telling me what's going on and keeping me fully informed, but one of my jobs as your boss is to make sure that you develop, you, my subordinates, develop humility vis-a-vis your next echelon down. Because what I've seen in the safety area is that if the CEO doesn't create a climate of, if anything is going wrong, please tell me about it immediately. If the boss doesn't say that, the layers under him won't say it, and the layers under him will continue to believe that what's really important is quality, schedules, productivity. And yes, they will say safety is number one, but they won't really create the climate for the kind of open communications that, at least in the high hazard industry, is essential. So the big challenge of the future is, how do we get through to CEOs? It's not going to be enough to have a lot of middle managers and people reading, yeah, this humble inquiry and this humble leadership stuff is right on, but my boss doesn't get it. And if that's the situation that continues, we won't have accomplished anything. I think we have to figure out, and I don't know how we will do this with coaching or with books or with whatever, that we have to get through to the top of the organization. We have to even train board members to begin to look at CEOs that they're about to appoint with an eye toward, does this person have enough humility to be able to run a modern organization that hinges very much on upward communication. That's the challenge, and I don't know quite how we will meet it, but it'll be fun to say, you know, something that I don't know if any of you out there are listening who are CEOs. This message is for you. For the others is to figure out how to get it through to your CEOs.
Excellent, Ed, and I'm as I'm listening to you, I know when we're introducing coaching ourselves into an organization, the idea of getting together to reflect and help one another, if you can get the most senior team just to do one session together, then there's a certain awareness that then can cascade downwards very easily. So yeah, getting the message higher up makes a huge difference. I want to take a little step back. There's some questions here. So Alexandra Salamis asked the following. She says, "Hi Ed, I'm thrilled that you're here. I find associated with this professional distance is the thinking that some leaders and managers think that they can't say, 'I don't know.' They believe that saying this reduces their credibility. Any comments?"
Well, I think the main point is that if they really think they know, if they are the expert, then it's perfectly okay for them to say, I should make the decision because I know what's going on. But if the boss really doesn't know and is de facto dependent, then to claim to know is professionally irresponsible. And it's interesting that I started the Humble Consulting book with a story of my own. I was about to go to meet with a group of doctors at Stanford Health, where we have a kind of a lunch group that I was invited into. And I was very nervous because I was approaching this lunch group and realized I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what, I was the convener and I didn't know what to do. And I thought this is the important message, is that there will be times when the boss doesn't know what to do, and they will have to learn, if they want to run a decent organization, that there are times when they have to admit that and make themselves vulnerable, and discover that actually that will motivate the subordinates to work harder and do better and contribute. I know the phenomenon. I know that's out there, that the boss is the one who's supposed to know and never admit that he doesn't. But I think the reality is that those bosses who do say, I don't know, actually gain credibility. So I think we have to get the boss who believes this to say, try it out, see what happens. Don't be so scared of losing credibility, because if you've got a decent group of subordinates, they're not going to lose faith in you. Now, I'm talking about Western culture. I think there may indeed be cultures where it's not possible to say I don't know, or I don't know what to do, because it's so embedded in the entire hierarchical structure. But in the US, and I suspect in Canada, it's perfectly okay for the boss to say, this is a tough problem. I'm not sure what we should be doing here. What do you guys think?
Hmm.
I think that's going to work out okay in the West.
Excellent. As you were talking, Alan Smith mentioned, I found that saying you don't know helps to build trust and provides an opportunity to find out together or provide opportunity for more collaboration.
Exactly, right on.
There's one other question, and we're a bit over time, but we're going to just continue with this other question, if that's all right with you, Ed?
No.
So David Krillman, who's a Coaching Ourselves author, HR writer from here in Toronto, he asks, Ed, what do you think about the idea of we need to create a coaching culture?
A coaching culture is a fine concept if we knew what it meant. But as you know, I've written a lot about culture, and my problem with culture is that people use the word and it has 1,000 meanings to 1,000 people. I think if you said we need to develop a value around coaching, that coaching is a good thing to be doing, that everyone can benefit from coaching. If you make it specific, then I'm 100% with you. But to say create a coaching culture doesn't tell you what that means without getting specific. So whenever the culture is used, I say, what do you mean by the word? So I don't want to throw that back at you because I kind of think I know what you meant, but I would urge you to be cautious in not using the word without specifying more precisely what that would mean. Does that mean, for example, every boss becomes a coach? That could be one definition. That might be an interesting concept. And some organizations do say that part of a boss's job is to develop the subordinates. But I wouldn't say it helps to call out a coaching culture. I think what is helpful is if you say specifically what you mean.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ed. So,
okay, well, this has been very enjoyable. I've had a good time talking to you. Thank you.
And thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Ed. So, without further ado, we're going to end the recording here, and we'll send all of you a link so that you'll have access to the recording. And when Ed Schein's latest Coaching Ourselves module is available, we'll send you a link for the partners so that you can take a look at that and see if you'd like to use that in your organizations or with your clients. Once again, thank you very much, Ed. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, good evening, whatever the case may be. Bye-bye.